And the parents afterwards come to me and go, God, Sarah, if only I'd have known when I tell them what the medication does, they're hot-footing it off to the paediatrician to get them back on meds, because they then appreciate that the meds are a protector, particularly in teenage years. And my next book coming out in January is all about parenting teenagers. And I've really rammed this home in every chapter. But, this is the problem. But if they're on meds, much less of a problem. It really does affect them dramatically.
Welcome to All Aboard, where we help parents navigate the ADHD journey. I'm Claire. Today we'll be talking about how teachers can get the best out of children with ADHD and why it is so important to have ADHD screening in schools for all, with our expert guest, Sarah Templeton. Sarah is an ADHD author, accredited counsellor and coach. She founded Headstuff ADHD Therapy, the biggest ADHD counselling and coaching company in the UK. Sarah herself has ADHD too, but was not diagnosed until her early 50s, something that came as a huge shock. But since that diagnosis in 2015, she has dedicated her life to helping ADHD children and adults. Sarah is especially passionate about changing the shocking lack of recognition and understanding of ADHD in schools and in the criminal justice system. Over the last 3 years, Sarah has written multiple books: How Not to Murder Your ADHD Kid, Teachers, How Not to Kill the Spirit in Your ADHD Kids, and the forthcoming How Not to Damage Your ADHD Adolescent, which will be published in 2024. Welcome aboard, Sarah.
Thank you.
So I am very excited to speak with you today. I am always so inspired by your passion for raising ADHD awareness every time I hear you speak, and it's something that I share with you. Today, we're going to highlight the importance of teachers nurturing ADHD brains as opposed to killing their spirit, as the title of your book goes.
Yeah.
And why routine screening for children is just so critical in achieving this. But before we dive in, I'd like to share, if I may, some personal insight. So as the mum of a 12-year-old son with ADHD, I know only too well how hard the classroom is. It's like continually trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And I also run an ADHD support group. And the first question I often ask parents is, if you took school out of the equation, would this be a problem? And they almost always answer no, which is really sad. And it's, of course, not the teacher's fault, because they work incredibly hard and they do the best they can, but they lack proper training. And we are constrained by an education system that's not designed for our children. So it can feel like a kind of constant uphill battle. And I say that as someone who is really lucky enough to have a really strong partnership with my son, Senko, one that we've been fortunate to build up over many years. Yet we seem to have a situation, and I speak from experience when I say this, where schools sort of accept ADHD diagnoses, but not the associated behaviours. It's almost like saying, we understand you have ADHD, but if you could not, that would be great.
Yeah.
To the point that I think almost worryingly, it's become normal to punish children for these symptoms, like fidgeting or calling out. And I mean, I know you understand only too well how big a part teachers and schools play in helping children get the best start in life. So before we get on to screening, which is so important, let's start by asking, how does ADHD affect a child's experience at school and their ability to learn in a classroom?
I think the answer to that is, it's a bit like how long's a piece of string, because it varies so hugely. I would say pretty much every ADHD child across the board, though, is going to experience boredom. That's one thing that is going to happen. And whether you're inattentive ADHD, combined, whatever you are, there are times when it's subjects or either a teacher that you don't relate well to or a subject that you're not interested in. That is going to be the one where you are going to struggle most. And, going back to when I was at school and I had absolutely no idea I had ADHD, I knew that I wanted to be a good student. I wasn't a swotty one, but I wanted to be a good student. I never skipped school or told a teacher to F off or anything like that. I was a good student as far as I was concerned. And that meant I knew concentrating and focusing and taking everything in. But it was so hard. In some lessons, it was so hard, and I used to end up getting very angry with myself because I couldn't do what other people just seem to be able to just sit there and do, So you end up, this is where I think low self-esteem and low self-worth are born at the very beginning, because you look at other people sitting there. I mean, I remember looking at people thinking, their legs haven't moved for an hour. Their pencil case hasn't moved for an hour. They have just sat there in the same position for an hour and they look absolutely fine and they're doing the work. How do they do that? I just couldn't grasp how other people could function without all the sort of things that were natural to me, which was needing to talk or needing to move or constantly needing to shift my position. That's what I did a lot. I would cross my leg over to the right, then move it over to the left, then sit back in my chair, then rock forward on my chair. I was always moving in some way. And I didn't understand how these other people could just sit so perfectly still. So I think how it affects children in class is so different. There are some that it's absolutely impossible. And I've met these in prisons, in education blocks, where they throw the boys out because they can't sit still in the class, either because they can't sit still or because they've got social anxiety and they just can't be in a room with, even with 6 or 8 people. So there are some that it's really, really affects. And then there's ones like me who probably coped better than a lot, but was it painful and torturous for me a lot of the time? Yes, it was. And that's why I've got this thing, my bee in my bonnet, my current bee. I've got a lot of bees, but my current bee is that I'm a counsellor. Yeah. Now in counselling, we learn all about being able to be your authentic self. You shouldn't have to mold yourself to be somebody else. You shouldn't have to get your there's something called your locus of valuation. Now your locus of valuation should always come from internal. Yeah. If your locus of valuation is your mum or your priest or your cub master, your scout master, it's wrong, because you should have your valuation should come from inside yourself. This is person-centered counselling. And I've begun to realise that in the ADHD world, this is what's missing. We're not allowed to be our authentic selves, and we should be. Because, I was born the way I was born. Who's to say that's right or wrong? Personally, I think it's very right. I think it's very, 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 some classes are very boring, and I should be allowed to find certain classes boring. And I should be allowed to focus on the ones that I absolutely love and I'm passionate about. That to me isn't wrong. So who's allowed to tell me that that's wrong and I've got to be exactly the same and appreciative and knowledgeable and enthusiastic about every single subject across the board? Because I don't think any child actually is. Just give me any child that loves everything equally. I don't think they exist. Whereas with ADHD, ours is perhaps a bit more heightened, especially if we've got coexisting. I don't really like the word comorbidities because it makes me think of death and morgues. So I use the word coexisting. So if we've got the coexisting conditions, which 80% of ADHD people have got at least one, and 50% of ADHD people have got 2. So that's a heck of a lot. Now I've got 3. And of course, mine's dyscalculia, my learning difficulty one. Of course, that meant any classes with numbers, maths in, my brain just went, sorry, not going here, what's for lunch? I just couldn't, my brain wouldn't even go there. It wouldn't even attempt to do what the teacher wanted. So we've got to take into account that all these ADHD kids, 80% of them may well have dyslexia or dyspraxia or dysgraphia or something else, and 50% have got 2. So how on earth are they going to be equally interested? And it's wrong that schools still expect you to be equally interested in every subject. That's my big gripe. And my big gripe really is that ADHD kids, what you said is absolutely true. So many people say, oh, we know he's ADHD. We know he's got a diagnosis, but he's still got to behave like all the other children. You're like, no, you've missed the entire point there. You can't just say, oh, well, you've got 1 leg, but you've still got to act like you've got 2. That's basically what they're saying. It's utterly ridiculous. You either accept that ADHD is a condition that someone's diagnosed with, someone has a proper psychiatric, this is not a GP diagnosis, this is a psychiatrist or a paediatrician. It's a proper diagnosis with proper traits. And you either accept that or you don't. And if you don't, you're wrong, because, it exists. We know it exists, and it's protected by the Equality Act and all the rest of it. But I think there's a massive, we do a lot of training of teachers, and 99.9% of them are absolutely wonderful, lovely people, desperate to help children, very well aware that they've not been trained in ADHD or ASD or the coexisting conditions. They're fully aware of it. And most of them, the vast majority, as I say, are like sponges. They soak up this information. They're desperate for this information, but it's not included in their training. And that's where it goes wrong. I did actually speak to a teacher the other day, a recently trained teacher, and she did say she went to quite a modern alternative sort of university. And they had one whole module in their teaching degree on different learning styles, different learning disabilities. Now that's amazing. One whole module, that I'm really thrilled about that. But she said that is a very out there, trendy, not your bog standard universities. But really, it's scandalous when you think that there are going to be so many ASD and ADHD, probably dyslexic, probably dysgraphia, probably dyscalculia children right the way through schools. And the vast majority of teachers aren't trained in how to work with it. It's shocking. And it's, as you say, it's completely not the teacher's fault. This should be included in training. An interesting fact, actually, I'm extremely old. Now I'm 60, yeah? Extremely old. However, just the other day, I spoke to my old English teacher. Now, God love her. She must be 85, 90. And I used to love my English teacher. She treated me with respect. That's the big one. Treated you like an adult. She was always respectful. I was always very respectful back to her. Got grade A in English, no problem. But she told me that back in the 70s, when I was at school and she was my teacher, this is a secondary school, she said, Sarah, I went on courses on dyslexia because I was interested in these other conditions then. But she said, I was the only one. Nobody else at the school was faintly interested. They just thought everybody should behave the same, behave, be quiet, sit down, shut up, perform, achieve the same. She said nobody else was really interested. And that was her in the 1970s. She was out there on her own, going to dyslexia courses and training and things. But the whole of my school, it was a big school, 1,000 kids with an awful lot of teachers. She said not one of the others was interested. She couldn't persuade anybody to come on courses with her. I think we're lucky that's changed now. On the whole, teachers do want to know this stuff. But where it's going wrong, and this is part of one of the things we're doing, we've got a very big team working on what we hope will become an ADHD Act. Mm-hmm. And included in that will very much be teacher training because they want it. They need it and they want it. So it needs to be in their training. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That's a great answer. No, it's a fantastic answer because it's so true. I think about my son again, he has ADHD and dyslexia, and there's such a stark contrast between him in the classroom when it's an active, obviously interest-based lesson versus the more conventional subjects that require reading and recording and writing and the things that actually cause him physical pain, and the difference in him between one half of the subjects versus the other. I mean, it's just so apparent. And yet he's someone who's fortunate enough to have a diagnosis. So then what about all the kids that don't? That I was one of them, like you. I only recently, about 18 months ago, had an adult diagnosis purely as a result of my son's journey. You suddenly start to look back on yourself. But it really highlights the necessity for this routine ADHD screening. And I was recently at the launch of Matt Hancock's new Accessible Learning Foundation, which obviously seeks to achieve screening for children aged 5 and up with dyslexia and hopefully ADHD, because it's so important. And I know you are extremely passionate about this and are campaigning.
Yes, and we've written to Matt Hancock.
Wow, amazing.
Matt Hancock invited me. We've written to Matt Hancock and we've heard back from a lovely lady called Sarah Dixon, who works with Matt Hancock.
She's amazing.
And is she? Yeah. We heard back from Sarah. And I said, Sarah, would you please stop Matt with his dyslexia bill? Because Matt is, for starters, screaming ADHD. I said, tell him that from me. And I said, and secondly, please, 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 please don't go and scream for dyslexia when you're missing the root cause of the dyslexia, which is the ADHD. Now, Sarah came back to me and said, I'm with you on this. I totally agree with you. I've got 2 ADHD children. So I said, please stop him pushing for this dyslexia bill. You're missing the point. You're Absolutely. Missing the root cause. So she said, we're just sort of setting up where we're doing this, that, and the other, and we will come back to you because we understand that, we need to, it's not dyslexia, it's just dyslexia. And I always say to people that dyslexia is both the easiest one that teachers can pick up, but it's also the most dangerous. Because once you've got that dyslexia diagnosis, and I have met hundreds of these people, once you've got that dyslexia diagnosis, all your struggles are put down to dyslexia. All of them. So, this is what I desperately don't want Matt Hancock and his one. It's fabulous that we've got Matt Hancock behind this because Matt Hancock is behind this, it will probably happen, which is terrific. But I've said to them, please, please, please don't just screen for dyslexia because that will just show up. You'll be missing the undiagnosed ADHD in a lot of those. I've never met one person with dyslexia who doesn't also have ADHD. I'm still waiting to. They may well be out there. I've never met them.
That's very interesting.
I've met thousands of people. I've had numerous couples in for counselling where the man has said I'm ADHD and the girl said I'm dyslexic. Well, by the end of every first session, we've known the girl's ADHD as well. I've yet to meet one person with dyslexia who hasn't got ADHD. As I say, they may exist. Please bring them to me because I've been researching this for years. I've not met one. So there's no point in just screening for dyslexia. You're missing not only the ADHD, but you're also possibly missing other coexisting conditions. That child with dyslexia might also have dysgraphia. They might also have dyscalculia. Please screen for the whole shebang. It doesn't take long. And this lovely Sarah has said, yes, we're with you on this. We appreciate that it's got to be screening for all neurodiversity, including autism, because, autism isn't picked up the same as ADHD isn't picked up, and the masking that goes on there and the damage that comes from autistic people who have to mask, I would say, and this is a bit of a strong statement, but I would say that's potentially more damaging for them because, the masking that autistic people do can really have a severe impact on them. Very, very severe. With ADHD, I think we're less good at masking and we let it out a bit more. But the ASD people, they mask so well that it's not going to be picked up unless you actually screen for it. So, yeah, I think it's, in answer to the Matt Hancock thing, I think it's amazing that he wants this screening, but it's got to include ADHD and all the other coexisting conditions. It's got to. And that's what we're pushing for.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Absolutely. Yeah. Where there is one, you will find the other. And it probably makes sense as to why when I look at statistics of the coexisting ADHD and dyslexia, they vary so wildly. So it's really interesting to suggest actually that once you have one, you would hide the other. And I guess with my son, I was fortunate that he had the ADHD diagnosis first and dyslexia followed. But he is also probably someone at a younger age where, because of the way in which his ADHD symptoms were more disruptive in a classroom, he is going to get picked up on that. If you perhaps looked at somebody like my daughter, who doesn't as of yet have a diagnosis, but I keep a very close eye on her, she's the opposite. She wants to please, she's masking much more, but I am almost certain that she has ADHD too. But without the opportunity to screen people, kids are going to get missed. And obviously that has major implications down the line. So how can we help teachers understand the ADHD brain and adapt, I guess, the teaching methods or the classrooms to engage and support them? Or what are the risks, perhaps more importantly, if we don't?
The risks are as severe as you want to make them. I mean, the risks start with low self-esteem, feeling that you're rubbish, feeling that you're not as good as everybody else. And then from that comes what? I mean, all sorts of things come from that. You can get teenage. I've had teenagers who've felt they're so, when I say had teenagers, I mean as counselling clients, I've had teenagers who've been so crippled by undiagnosed coexisting conditions that they've had to take vodka in the morning before they could go to school. I've had other teenagers who've just swerved school at every opportunity they can. They've literally gone down the road, waited for their mum to go to work and gone home. Because what other people, well, you'll know, but a lot of people don't know, is that we have rejection sensitive dysphoria. So anything where we're going to feel rejected or humiliated, we will swerve like the plague. I've had kids who hide in the toilets all day rather than go into classes. So, and from that comes what? Comes going out, comes meeting older teenagers, comes getting involved in criminal stuff from a very young age, might involve drugs, might involve, who knows? I mean, the pathway from literally not having your conditions identified to prison is scarily short. Because from not having your conditions identified comes low self-esteem. How do you build your self-esteem? Well, if older teenagers go, yeah, you're right, mate, come out with us. You're a good lad, come out with us. And by the way, just get through that little window there and get in there and get that key. It's seconds, before you've got somebody making you feel better by getting you involved in a gang, and bang, you're 13 and you're arrested. It's so quick. And this is what I try and explain to people, that the young offender institutes are full of these kids who actually aren't bad. They're not evil, nasty kids. They've just got a lot of these conditions that haven't been picked up. So what have they done? They've swerved school. They've got into trouble. They've done a bit of criminal damage or a bit of a fray or told a policeman to naff off or whatever. And bang, they've got a criminal record. And they're in a young offender institute. And they're shocked, But when they actually do, they've done quite a lot of this recently. They've been putting out figures of how many people have got learning difficulties in prisons and how many people are neurodivergent, and they're horrendous. The figures, absolutely horrendous. I think it was something like that. One of the very recent ones I saw was 50% of people in prison can't write. Well, why can't they write? Very possibly dyslexia, dysgraphia, something. Even if it was, not a lot of people don't know the ADHD trait of having difficulty understanding instructions and directions. Now, I had that one at school, and I used to have to look, often I would have to look over the next person's work and think, that's what they meant. And then I do it. Now, how many ADHD kids have just got that? They've got a difficulty interpreting what the teacher actually means. And because they don't get what they mean, that makes them feel a fool, which they can't stand because of their rejection sensitive dysphoria. So they'll either kick off, they'll swear, they'll start distracting somebody else or whatever. And bang, before you know it, they're out, detention, exclusion, whatever. And it goes from there. So not identifying ADHD, dyslexia, whatever it is, early on, the result of that can be horrendous. Of course, it can just be like me. Mine wasn't horrendous. Mine was just frustration because I ended up in a secondary modern school I shouldn't have been at because of my dyscalculia. So I failed the 12 plus despite the headmaster and my mother appealing. I still got put into the stupid secondary school where a year after I was there, the headmistress rang my mother and said, "You shouldn't be here. I've got to replace at the grammar school." They sent my mother the uniform list. She couldn't afford it. She'd just spent out the year before on the other school. So I spent 4 years in a school I shouldn't have been at because nobody had identified my ADHD nor my dyscalculia. So I ended up just angry, fed up, bored because I was brighter pretty much than there were other girls there actually that I look back and think, yeah, you were ADHD as well. You were in the wrong school as well. So there were some girls that I got on with because, we were all bored rigid because we shouldn't have been at that school. But mostly I just spent 4 years learning nothing. I'd learnt more at my very good junior school than I learnt at my very poor secondary modern. And so my result, no crime, no offending, no smoking even. I mean, I have drunk a little bit in the past, but not to any sort of detriment of myself. But I've never smoked, I've never done drugs, never even done weed, and never broken the law. So for me, having it not identified wasn't too dreadful. It just meant a really rubbish secondary education and then not sort of proceeding as I could have done through the A-level university route, which I could have done. But I didn't because it all went horribly wrong at 12. But that's about as good as it gets. I'm about as good as it gets. It gets an awful lot worse than that. And I've worked with these kids. I'll give you a prime example. There's a boy currently in Feltham Young Offenders who got I think it was an 8-year sentence, group enterprise. So he was joint enterprise rather. There were several of them. He didn't actually do anything, but he was with a group where somebody did. Now that boy had been accepted at 2 universities that September to do graphic design. 2 universities wanted him. Instead, he went to Feltham, where he's currently sitting, doing 8 years. I think he got 8 years, so he'll serve 4. So at 18, he's serving 4 years in prison, whereas he could have been at university. But his ADHD, it was picked up, but not way too late. And he was also not medicated. This is also another big danger. One of my big things that I bang on about. Teenagers especially need to be medicated because otherwise they are going to risk take, thrill seek, push boundaries, and they are so often going to end up in trouble. Every teenager that I've had in my therapy room who is ADHD has not been on medication, and they've all got into trouble because of that. The ones on medication, I don't see them because they're at school and they're doing fine and, they're okay. But medication is something that before I knew much about ADHD, I wouldn't have thought there was any, great, strong desire for children to take it. I would have thought it was a you can or you can't. Now I know what I know about ADHD medication in teenagers. I'm the biggest advocate for medication because it protects them through their teens especially. And as I say, all the ones that I've had in my therapy room that have got into trouble, and I've had them all. I've had teens in there for drug dealing, buying guns, what else? Sexual assault, fighting, affray, drunk and disorderly. These are all teenagers, and they've all not been on medication. And all of those were diagnosed. But you see, and the parents afterwards come to me and go, God, Sarah, if only I'd have known. When I tell them what the medication does, they're hot-footing it off to the paediatrician to get them back on meds, because they then appreciate that the meds are a protector, particularly in teenage years. And my next book coming out in January is all about parenting teenagers. And I've really rammed this home in every chapter that, this is the problem. But if they're on meds, much less of a problem. It really does affect them dramatically. Sorry, I've gone off at a tangent there. But
not at all. It's really interesting. I'm super excited about that book, because obviously my son was diagnosed at 6 and I've gone through that journey, and we're about to hit the adolescent years. But I think it's an interesting point, because I've always talked about medication, and I appreciate it's a very personal choice journey, but I've always talked about medication just trying to level the playing field a little bit, when you're in that classroom scenario. And, my son is diagnosed. He is medicated. He takes Concerta, pressure methylphenidate. But even then, there can be quite a stark difference between how he is copes or is in one subject versus another. And I guess then it's like, well, what can we do to help teachers maybe understand ADHD beyond the stereotypes? As you say, there's things that perhaps just don't really understand, even instruction basis. Or what practical strategies can they employ in their classroom beyond the, well, we've always done it this way? What can they do practically to benefit children?
If we're actually talking directly to teachers to what they can do, I always say keep the ADHD child as active as possible. So if you need an errand running anywhere, use the ADHD child. If you need books giving out, use the ADHD child. If you need homework giving out, use the ADHD child. If you want something writing on the board, people shout out things, use the ADHD child. Keep them as active as you possibly can. That is always going to help. Yeah. And involve them as much as possible. So if there are going to be teams, let's say, put the ADHD child in charge of picking who are the team leaders and who's going to pick who. Give them jobs to do. An ADHD child loves a job. They love to feel that they're worthwhile and there's something to do. And it also makes them feel important. Making them feel in charge is really good. So I always say to teachers, and also the way you word things. So if you ask an ADHD child if they'd like to do something, you'll get a much better response than if you tell. So if you say to them, look, I appreciate you got an hour's history here, and I know it's not your favourite subject. Would you like to do it now before break and get it out the way? Do you want to do it at home tonight, or would you like to come in tomorrow morning and I'll come in early tomorrow morning and I'll do it with you tomorrow morning? If you ask an ADHD child to do their history homework that way, it'll get done, because you've just put them in charge of how they're going to do it. And they will make the decision, and therefore they will do it. Whereas if you say, you very well get that history homework into me by 10 o'clock tomorrow or else, straight away their hackles will be up. And straight away they will want to say, up yours, not doing it. But it's all about the way. Actually, a lady wrote something on Facebook this week about one of my books, and I thought, I'd never even thought about it like that. But she said, my first book has changed her household because now she uses the language of love. And I thought, wow, I didn't give her that phrase, but she's picked that up from my book. And the example she used was, and she's absolutely right, that if she tells her son to go upstairs and get his washing and bring it down, it may or may not happen. But now what she says is, if you go upstairs and get your washing and get all of it for me and strip your bed, I'll do my absolute best to get all of that washing done for you and back up there by Tuesday. Is that okay? Now, and she said that's how she phrases it now. And her son's up those stairs getting the washing and bringing it all down because mum's just said, I'm going to do my absolute best for you to bring it down by Tuesday. So she calls it the language of love. And she's right. If you do things in a loving, kind, I'm helping you way, that will not put the hackles of an ADHD child up. Whereas a direct barking, especially shouting, I always say to teachers, don't shout. Don't shout. Most ADHD people, me included, have got sensory processing disorder. We reckon 8 or 9 out of 10 have got sensory processing disorder. So when teachers come in, my maths teacher, for example, I won't do it at the pitch she did it, but she would walk in and she would go, all right, ladies. And it was a shout from the start, a shout. And straight away I was like, So shouting or raising your voice is not a good thing with ADHD people, because it can automatically put their hackles up, and it can also make them react. And if they're not on meds, they'll react impulsively and without thinking of the consequences. And very soon they will be going, shut up, because they can't stand the noise. So not shouting is a big clue, and keeping the ADHD child active and as much as possible putting them in charge, and also motivation. I can remember this vividly. This is how well this worked. I remember our teacher one day, it was a beautiful hot sunny day, and I remember her saying, if you get all this done in by past, I'll let you have an extra 15 minutes on the field. Well, my God, did we get that done quick, and we'll be out on that field, So little things like that. And I always say to teachers, it doesn't have to cost money. It can be things like, if you get that, I know geography is not your favourite, I get it. But if you get that done quick, I'll let you out of the class first, and you could be first in the lunch queue. Little bits of motivation like that for an ADHD child, you'll get the best out of them. It doesn't have to cost anything, but it could be, if you do that quickly and get that finished, you can be team captain in football this afternoon. That's enough motivation. They need something to get their little brain buzzing, give some excitement, especially when things are boring. This isn't so important in PE or chemistry or science, but it's important in things like English, maths, geography, history. Give them some little buzz that is going to excite them. I remember our history teacher, actually, we had one whole afternoon of history, which was one of my favourite subjects. I adored it. And my buzz in that lesson, I don't think she did it for this reason, but it gave me an amazing buzz. She let us all bring in our own mug. And this was, we were 14, 15. We weren't grown-ups, but we were allowed to bring in our own mug. And we stopped halfway through history and we had a cup of tea, And that to me was just like, I look forward to that lesson all week, because we were going to sit like grown-ups and have a cup of tea. So the simplest of things that will excite an ADHD person, just don't keep it boring. I think this is fascinating. A lot of the, I work with a lot of SEND teachers. We've got SEND teachers on our team and teachers, and they always say, if you teach a whole classroom in a way that is neurodiverse friendly, you will not damage any child. But if you teach the whole lot of them in a way that is for neurotypical, you will damage the neurodiverse, So when I'm talking to teachers, I often say, if you've got an hour, if you can break it up into 3 lots of 20, ideal. If you could do 20 minutes of chat and then a quiz for the next 20 minutes on what they've just learned. ADHD kids love quizzes because they love winning. So, do a bit of learning and there's going to be a quiz on this at the end, and so then 20 minutes of quiz, and then 20 minutes of watching a DVD or something on it. Break it up so there's different segments, and tell them in advance it's going to be broken up. Because as soon as they know, we've only got 20 minutes of this, then we're doing something else, that will motivate. And that doesn't damage any child at all. So if we sort of not excite, but just insert a bit of difference into classes, so they're not one thing for the whole 50 minutes or hour or whatever it is, I think honestly it's going to make everybody perform better, and it's definitely going to make the ADHD kids perform better and enjoy it.
Absolutely. And I like your story of the mug, because I think in some ways, and obviously all the other examples, what is so powerful there, beyond the fact that it's a treat and it's breaking it up, it's building the relationship and the respect and almost treating you as an equal. And I think I say this all the time to teachers too, and I appreciate it's exceptionally hard and they have lots and lots of kids, but you have to build the relationship. They have to trust you, because then suddenly that can be the key to so many things.
Absolutely. And when I look back to my junior and senior school teachers, it was the ones who treated me with respect, who knew their subject well, didn't shout. I never liked the shouters, and I was putty in their hands. I would do anything for them. Whereas there were a couple. There was one who was particularly ineffectual, and she did have a very high-pitched sort of whiny voice, and that never went down well with me. She was a nice woman, but very, very whiny, and she tended to sort of shout with her whiny voice, and that was no. And then there was this just god-awful maths teacher who just used to shout from the minute she walked in the room, and it was just her way of communicating, and it was awful. And Snap, the music teacher, actually, we had a music teacher who was the same. everything was at a high pitch and shouted. Well, the whole class was wasted on me because I was literally in pain from listening to that, high pitched, shouty noise. Kept nice and calm, like my English teacher, who was beautifully spoken and spoke like this, very quiet. Hello, girls. How are you today? I thought we'd do this today. And she just so lovely and warm and friendly. And she had the best behaved students in her class because she treated us with respect. She didn't shout at us. And she kept things interesting, It's not hard. And I think when I go back to my counselling training, I threw all that out the window as soon as I started to counsel because I did 5.5 years counselling training, realised it was a total waste of time. I actually knew more before about relating to people and caring about people and all the rest of it. And I think it's a bit the same for teachers. I get the impression they're trained to be sort of almost like Stepford wives teachers, and actually if you allow them to be themselves and you allow their personality to come through and you allow the kindness and the caring, which the vast majority have got. The vast majority of teachers I meet are absolutely lovely people who are in the job for the right reason. They're in, because they genuinely care about children and they genuinely want to educate them, but they're not given the right skills to do it. I'll give you one classic example of this. I did some training at a school in North London, and it was 2 schools combined. They'd invited the 2 lots of teachers and 2 lots of parents. And at the end of the teacher training, one of the Senkos came up to me and she said, Sarah, I've been a Senko for 20 years. And she said, everything you've just told me in there, I've never heard in 20 years Senko training. And she said, I'm diagnosed with dyslexia. So are my 2 daughters. She said, well, thank you for that. I've just now realised we're all ADHD. That's the first thing. So thank you for that. But also thank you for giving me more information in 2 hours than I've learned in 20 years Senko training. And afterwards, I almost wish I could have phoned her up and said, what do they actually teach you in Senko training then? All I've taught you is how ADHD brains think, all the traits, all the ways, difficulty understanding instructions and directions, all those sorts of things, heightened sense of justice, all the different ways we have of thinking and doing things. What have they been telling you in 20 years that you didn't know any of that? She can't be the only Senko that's had that training. She's a lovely woman. And she was like, thank you so much. And her last words were, thank you. I can now go back and do my job properly. Well, it shouldn't take me going into a school to tell her that. That should have happened in the 20 years Senko training. This is where it's going wrong somewhere. There's a big void somewhere of what ADHD actually is and how to interact with ADHD kids and what people are being trained to do. It would seem to be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if that's the experience of one, that's the experience of many. So what one piece of advice would you give to parents who are listening whose kids are struggling at school, maybe to help them feel a bit less alone in this journey?
I would say, I always say this, don't expect the teacher, to understand each individual ADHD child because they'll all be different. Every ADHD child will be different. They will all struggle with certain things. Some will have sensory processing disorder. They won't be able to have their button done up because it will feel like it's choking them. There will be lots and lots and lots of things that are unique to your child. So don't expect just because you tell the teacher, my child's got ADHD, that means the teacher understands your child. Forget that, because the ADHD is so different in all of us. So I say, write it down. Give it them in a nice little booklet, get it typed up. This is what will annoy him. This is what he will love. This is how he'll have to wear his school uniform. He won't be able to wear his shirt button to the top because it will feel like he's choking. So let him undo the top button, but he will still put his tie up over it. Be very, very specific about your child. And I've seen parents do this in lots of different ways, but it works beautifully in a neat little booklet. This is Tom. Tom's got ADHD, dyscalculia, and sensory processing disorder. This is what Tom needs. And then literally just what Tom needs and what Tom doesn't. And then that can be passed from teacher to teacher. Because I think one of the biggest, one of the biggest misnomers, if that's the right word, is that teachers are trained that all ADHD kids are the same and all ASD kids are the same. That couldn't be further from the truth, So how can they be trained in all these different traits? Well, they can't. Well, I go into schools training. I've written a book for teachers. The reason I wrote a book for teachers was because so many people were giving my first book, which was for parents, to teachers and saying, look, this is what my child is. He's not just a naughty little who won't listen to you, and this is what he's got going on. So I stopped them giving that book to teachers, and I rewrote it for teachers because there's a lot of extra stuff in there. So if you can, buy the teachers a book on ADHD, mine or anybody else's, and let them read what ADHD really is, that will be very helpful to them, and the vast majority will be very grateful. And I think the big thing is not expecting all kids to be the same, because I always say, we've all got different kinds of ADHD, different severities of it. We've got different coexisting conditions and different severities of them. And then we've all got different traits. So, for example, I don't procrastinate and I don't lack motivation, but my inattention is appalling. So then your teachers need to know that some kids will have very strong some things and very weak other things. That's just how it's going to be. And for the parents, I would say, don't expect the teachers to have any training in ADHD at all. Assume they've had none. And even if they've had some, they won't have had it in your specific child. So you need to explain what your child needs, what they react badly to, if they are particularly emotional, if they cry a lot, if they need to be sitting at the front of the class, which a lot of kids like, or if they need to be at the back of the class, which was me, because I needed to check that no one was talking about me. My anxiety was so much so that I needed to keep my eye on everybody in case they were talking about me. But I've met plenty of kids who say, I like to sit right underneath the teacher, then I could just literally look at the teacher and nothing else gets in the way. But for me, that would be very anxiety giving, sitting at the front of class. I'd have hated it. So you can't expect teachers to know what each individual ADHD child is going to need, but you can get that information from the parents and usually not the child, because the child usually won't know much about, and until you say to a child, do you prefer sitting at the front or at the back? They won't have thought about it. When you get them to think about it, they'll then tell you, well, yeah, actually the front, because then I can hear it better or whatever, So talk to the child and then present that information to the teacher about your individual child is my best advice.
That's great advice, because hopefully collectively we can all become educators then, if we're all doing this and we're all communicating
Absolutely.
about our individual children and ADHD in general, to help kind of fill that gap in knowledge and understanding. Sarah, thank you so much for an insightful and inspiring conversation today. It's honestly been such a privilege to chat to you. I always feel so inspired by any time I hear you speak. So having had the opportunity to do it in person has been a real honour. So thank you very, very much for your time.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about Sarah's work, how better to support your child in school, or you'd like to read any of her amazing books, then please do check out our show notes below for a link to Headstuff ADHD Therapy along with more information. And if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please can you follow and review All Aboard to help others find this podcast and welcome them aboard our journey too. Thank you for listening to All Aboard.